I'm getting a weird feeling of deja vu. It feels like we just went through this a few months ago. Oh wait, we literally did. It's Caravan 2, Electric Boogaloo, Hole Express, Borderlands 2. It's also tiresome. For the uninitiated, back in April, a caravan of illegal migrants, thousands of them in fact, marched through Central America, up through Mexico, and arrived at the U.S. border. And in a stunning display of weakness, President Trump, the U.S. military, and Department of Homeland Security did nothing to stop them. They were allowed to walk right up to the border fence in San Diego, climb on top, and invade our country uninhibited. They then applied for asylum status, claiming to be victims of oppression and economic instability back in their home countries. Yeah, you sure look like someone fleeing oppression and starvation. Definitely not just an opportunistic migrant looking to take advantage of our Swiss cheese-esque immigration policies. But now, as if that first one wasn't bad enough, there is a new caravan heading straight towards our border. 7,000 invaders, actually scratch that, 14,000 invaders, 14,000 illegal migrants from Central America are careening through Mexico, demanding that they be allowed entry into our country. There seems to be an idea in the media and in the international community that access to the US and Europe is a fundamental human right. They seem to believe that all people from third world countries across the world have a basic, unalienable right to migrate to a country built by white people. In today's video, we'll dig deeper into today's caravan. We'll talk about why this is being allowed to happen and who is helping these migrants along their journey. We'll talk about why they should absolutely not be let into our country under any circumstances. And finally, we'll talk about how President Trump and the military should respond to keep our country's borders safe. But first, your online privacy and security. Last month, Facebook suffered one of their biggest data breaches yet, as hackers made off with the sensitive information of approximately 30 million users, contact info, phone numbers, email addresses, hometowns, current cities, birth dates, device types, and more. This was the information that hackers gathered and stole by exploiting a breach in Facebook's security protocols. You want to stay safe online? Be smart about what you post, obviously, but you need to take your personal internet protection to the next level by using a VPN or virtual private network. Prevent yourself from falling victim to hackers on public Wi-Fi or shady websites that log and store your info by using Virtual Shield, one of the easiest to use and fastest VPNs in the world. They have a strict no-log policy that means your personal info and browsing history isn't being stored anywhere. You have the right to total and complete privacy. This month, Virtual Shield is offering 25% off VPN plans and all premium add-ons, including Protection Plus, residential access, monthly maintenance, phone support, and more for as low as $3 a month. And don't forget about IdentiSafe, which allows you to block microphone and camera access from unwanted spies and hackers. If you don't want entities public or private watching and listening, IdentiSafe is for you. virtualshield.com/allsup. Check it out today. They're the only VPN that I trust. All right, so our friends in the Migrant Caravan. I wrote this script when there were just 7,000 of them, but now, according to the most recent information, there are 14,000 of them. And I'm sure the left will be quick to tell us that these 14,000 migrants are all doctors and lawyers and scientists. And establishment Republicans will tell us that these are 14,000 future natural conservatives. Of course, anyone who's paying attention knows that these people are going to be nothing but a burden on our society. They're low-skilled, low-IQ economic migrants from third-world failed states. The only thing they could possibly contribute to our country is unskilled physical labor, but the costs associated with bringing them in, the cost for medical care, the spread of infectious disease, emergency room costs, and the cost of educating their anchor baby kids, etc., bringing in these people is a losing proposition in every way for the United States. You have to wonder why there's any discussion at all about letting these people in our country. How could someone be so misguided? Or, if you ascribe a more sinister motive, so anti-American and evil, to demand that these 14,000 migrants be allowed to flagrantly break our immigration laws and just walk through our border with no resistance? Well, it's because many normies are easily fooled and believe everything they hear. These migrants are claiming to be refugees, fleeing bad conditions in their home country. If I were to trash my rental house, punch out the walls, break all the windows, tear up the carpet, and smash up the appliances, I'd be living in some pretty bad conditions. But that wouldn't entitle me to then walk across the street and start living in my neighbor's living room. Of course, according to the United Nations, this sort of common sense does not apply to the United States. According to the UN, the U.S. is, quote, on shaky legal ground in barring Central American asylum seekers from entering the U.S. The UNHCR reports people fleeing persecution and violence have a right to international protection. The UN Refugee Agency does not question the sovereign right of any nation to control its borders, but it does say that international law governs the way countries must behave toward refugees and asylum seekers. So we have a right to control our borders in name only, until someone walks up, says they're fleeing oppression, and then we're required to let them in. No questions asked. Want more proof these people aren't real refugees? The Mexican government actually offered the caravan members asylum, and they weren't interested. According to on-the-ground reports, they just blew right past towards the United States. Perhaps most of these migrants, like this one, want more than just basic safety. They want their PlayStations and their Buffalo Wild Wings. First world problems for third world people. This system is so flawed that these people have, of course, figured out how to exploit it. According to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the asylum system is, quote, increasingly vulnerable to fraud and abuse, due in part to the sheer volume of migrants that are washing up on our shores and claiming asylum. Additionally, according to Department of Homeland Security Chief Kirsten Nielsen, an estimated 80% of asylum applications are fraudulent. Quote, the way the system works right now, the threshold under law is so low that about 80% pass that initial interview, but only 20% are granted asylum by a judge, which tells us that 80% of that is either just a flat-out fraud or somebody who thinks they can come here because they want a job here. That's not asylum, or I want to reunify with my family. That's not asylum. I just want to come to the U.S., not asylum. We have legal ways to do that, but it's not through asylum, Nielsen told Fox News host Laura Ingraham. And yet, the UN is demanding that we simply open our borders to the entirety of the third world, claiming things aren't exactly pristine in their home countries. From Voice of America, quote, the UNHCR says it recognizes the arrival of thousands of Honduran migrants in the caravan at the U.S. borders will be overwhelming. But, spokesman Charlie Yaxley says closing the border to the caravan is not a solution and will likely cause harm to those who have a legitimate fear for their lives. We wish to reiterate and underline that any individuals within that group that are fleeing persecution and violence, they need to be given access to territory, and they need to be allowed to exercise their fundamental human rights to seek asylum and have access to refugee status determination procedures, he said. In other words, access to the United States, access to our home country, is a fundamental human right. With friends like the UN, the U.S. doesn't need enemies. But notice how they try to present these people as refugees, fleeing war and oppression, or whatever. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. These people are economic migrants and largely nothing more. If you want evidence, let's look at some of what they're saying. From Breitbart.com, Jose Anibal Rivera, 52, an unemployed security guard from San Pedro Sula, crossed into Mexico by raft Sunday and walked up to Tapachula from Ciudad Hidalgo to join the caravan. There are 500 more people behind me, he told the Associated Press. He vowed to reach the U.S. border, still nearly 2,000 road miles away at its closest point. Anything that happens, even if they kill me, is better than going back to Honduras, he said. Ana Luisa España, a clothes washer and ironer from Chimolcamula, Guatemala, joined the caravan as she saw it pass through Guatemala. The goal is to reach the U.S. border, she said. We only want to work, and if a job turns up in Mexico, I would do it. We would do anything except bad things. So her priority here is getting a job, not seeking refugee status. Interesting. And from Fox News, others who had previously been deported from the U.S. and are part of the caravan told the Washington Post that family and work are driving factors in them making the journey back to America. We are workers. What are we supposed to do in Honduras if there's no work? Said Evan Mata, a 21-year-old construction worker who was deported 3 months ago from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Juan Jimenez, a 32-year-old Honduran who had been deported 6 months ago from Phoenix, said he was going to see his 6-year-old son, who's still living in the U.S. Yeah, sorry, I don't think unemployment and being deported after being an illegal immigrant is a denial of your basic human rights. You don't get refugee status for not having a job. And as the caravan moves further north into Mexico, it grows in size. Again, if this were actually a refugee caravan, more people wouldn't be joining in Mexico as it goes along. You wouldn't have these people saying they'll take work in Mexico if they can get it. This is purely a caravan of economic migrants. Now, these people haven't been walking the entire way, as the media would like you to believe. Planes, trains, and automobiles, right? Well, more like buses, flatbeds, and pickup trucks, but yeah, these people have been materially assisted throughout their journey by a variety of groups. For example, the Mexican government, despite blocking some of the migrants at the Guatemalan border, has been deploying police helicopters and officers to help keep the migrants safe along their journey and escort them through Mexico. The Red Cross has dispatched some of their personnel to provide medical treatment to these refugees. So-called refugees anyways. Additionally, some of the flatbed trucks used to transport these migrants through Guatemala and Mexico were emblazoned with very interesting religious symbolism. You have to wonder, what do these groups have to gain by helping these illegal migrants get from the third world into the U.S.? It's all very strange. I wonder why a Star of David would be featured prominently on a flatbed truck being used to help ship migrants from the third world into the U.S. One of these people arrested by Mexican officials was Ireneo Mujica. According to azcentral.com, the Mexican-American dual citizen was, quote, one of the main organizers of last spring's Migrant Caravan that prompted President Donald Trump to order the deployment of the National Guard troops to the border, end quote. Anyways, it's clear that NGOs and third world governments are both complicit in helping this caravan along. There have been rumors of Mexico sending in federal police, 2 airliners full apparently, to intercept the caravan, but at the time of this video, no serious action has been undertaken. And of course, domestic left-wing media is providing wall-to-wall positive coverage about how victimized these poor migrants are. This is happening because the media supports the political left, and these caravanners would be fantastic for the political goals of the left. These migrants would overwhelmingly support left-wing policies. We know this. 70 to 80% of their anchor babies would support and vote for Democrats. We know this too. Plus, we know that the main goal of the left in America now is to permanently transform the United States. You don't have to look any further than the front pages of the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN to see that this is true. They're counting down the days until America becomes a majority-minority country. And coupled with the virulent anti-white hatred we've seen from the left as of late, that's a dangerous combination. The left is determined to transform America's racial demographics. They long for the day when white Americans become the minority, and 7,000 new third-world migrants, plus their anchor babies, helps expedite that process. Now, here's why Trump needs to stop this caravan. We've talked about the long-term economic, employment, and political ramifications already, but there are some even more fundamental reasons why this caravan must be stopped. This is a test of the United States' national will, strength, and character. Are we a country that has the will to defend its borders? Are we a country with the strength necessary to protect ourselves from invasion? And is self-defense any longer in our national character? Or are we now a nation that rolls over and surrenders in the face of international and NGO pressure? This was the danger of allowing the first caravan to cross the border uninhibited. I warned about this back in my first video about that last caravan. Allowing your borders to be flaunted this explicitly is a sign to the rest of the third world that the US no longer has serious borders. And if you want to get in, all you have to do is start another caravan and you'll make it across. It's like when you give your kid a piece of candy to stop them from throwing a fit. They know that if they want candy, all they have to do in the future is throw another fit. The U.S. can no longer afford to be the repository for every third world migrant that wants a better life. It's over. It's time for us to close our borders. We don't have the money or social cohesion to be able to successfully assimilate these people any longer. And fundamentally, we need to be thinking about this from an America First perspective. What is going to be good for us as Americans? Now, let's talk about Trump's response. I was actually at the rally in Missoula, Montana, where he threatened to send in the military if this caravan wasn't broken up. This is a great promise, but there has to be follow-through. Words are not enough. Action is necessary. In a strict sense, this caravan is absolutely an invasion. Many of the people coming in have been pictured waving Honduran flags and cursing out the American president. Any nation that would allow in thousands of people that openly express their hatred for their would-be host country is not a serious country. In anticipation of this caravan, the border must absolutely be defended by the military. There's no other option. And as was pointed out earlier on Twitter, the U.S. has troops deployed to defend borders all over the world. Why wouldn't we deploy troops to defend our own border? Additionally, Trump has stated on Twitter that he's instructed the military to treat this caravan as a national emergency. We can only hope that General Mattis, who has so far been reluctant to carry out some of Trump's other directives, will actually come through and do his job on this one. It's important to remember, too, that no one bats an eye when other countries defend their borders. For example, in May of this year, Israeli soldiers fired on Palestinian protesters at the Israel-Palestine border. They killed 60 Palestinians, including teenagers, and nearly 1,400 people were wounded by gunfire. Israel is allowed to massacre Palestinians protesting on their side of the border. These Palestinians weren't even trying to invade Israel. They were just protesting. Remind me again why the U.S. military is not allowed to use force to defend our border. But Israel can kill Palestinians at their border carte blanche on a weekly basis, and no one finds that objectionable. If Trump is unsuccessful and this caravan is allowed to enter, it would be a disaster for the country. Caravans like this will happen in greater and greater numbers. The last caravan was a test, and the U.S. failed. This caravan feels like a final exam. 14,000 strong, the immediate effects of letting these people in would be disastrous. It would create an immediate backlog on our asylum system, put immense strain on our immigration system, and cause chaos on the border. And that's not even mentioning the sheer economic cost of managing and dealing and resettling with these people, as previously mentioned. Trump was elected by the voters largely due to his promise to close the borders and defend the country. If he can't do that, then that's going to massively depress voter turnout in these 2018 midterm elections. But if Trump passes this test and deploys the military to defend our borders, this will be great news going into the midterms. The visuals of migrants crossing over a border fence unabated from earlier this year was massively discouraging for people that want to see our borders protected. And if Trump is able to do the opposite this time, if he's able to get a massive win for our country right ahead of the midterms, that will not only be great for the country, it will be great political fodder as well. Republicans can't possibly hope to explain to voters why they deserve to be reelected if, while controlling all three branches of government, they can't even keep an invading army of 14,000 people out of our country. This isn't all about the politics, of course. It's about national security and national identity. But if Trump and the Republicans fail on this one, their political futures will become much more difficult, as will securing the border going forward, with caravan after caravan battering our border with no end in sight.